Well, thank you all for joining this session. This session is somewhat different from the other sessions in that it doesn't talk that much about the product, but rather about how we develop the product and some of the pains and some of the learnings we've gone through while developing this last version. So it is not going to be very technical. On the other hand, it's probably what, at least, is most of my concern is how do I make sure that we can continue evolving NAV and provide values to you and the customers and how can we actually maximize the value that we provide them in future versions. First, I'll look back a little at some of the latest releases we've had. You know that we released NAV 2009, that's almost 4 years ago. Wasn't exactly the perfect release. I think a lot of people, including you, were probably waiting for Service Pack 1 until you really jumped onto it, which came a year later. But we actually think that as an organization, we were better equipped to deliver that release. And then while we did NAV 7, which is now called NAV 2013, we actually saw that there was a market opportunity by doing an R2 of NAV 2009. So that release was put in between the 2009 and SP1 release. But the R2 release actually made us realize something as an organization, that honestly, it took way too long for us to get products out the door.
So based on the current size of the feature, we knew that our planned end date is in jeopardy now. So we had to do something. So that was the main theme around our sprint retrospective. What can we do now? So based on the current team size, we saw that we can only work on one deliverable at a time. So because we understand the feature much better now, why not start with working on 2 deliverables at the same time? So our suggestion from management, and this was the adjustment we made after the first sprint, is give us one more dev and give us one more tester. We'll start working on 2 deliverables at the same time. So it's important that you adjust at the end of every sprint. Don't adjust between the sprint, then try it for 2 weeks and then adjust. So end of sprint 3, this was the team size. I guess the picture explains itself. And we started sprint 3. So beginning of sprint 3, there were 2 new people in the team. And we started with knowledge sharing and demos to the new team members to get them ramped up. And we started working on 2 deliverables in parallel, and we used the same agile processes. And then at the end of sprint 3, we saw that, okay, it didn't work like we planned. We still had 2 deliverables in progress. We were not going as fast as we expected because people didn't really ramp up on this complex feature as fast as we wanted. And we were still not going to hit our end date. So what should we do now? So with this problem, we went into the sprint retrospective, and then we decided, what if we try to break up this feature into 2? Why do we need to deliver this whole feature? I mean, do people really need this whole feature at the same time? So we started speaking to the local functionality experts, and we tried to figure out which part of the feature does the customer need first, and which part of the feature does he need later maybe. And then use that information to reprioritize our deliverables. And our main idea was, let's try to put the deliverables into 2 buckets, basic features and advanced features. And this is actually also touching on the point of queuing, which Jens was talking about. You are queuing a huge amount of functionality, part of which is developed, to the end of all the 90 effort points. But why? I mean, if you have the basic posting working and your reports are not working, customer can still post using this advanced posting mechanism, right? You can report maybe quarterly or yearly. I mean, you might not read the reports and all the advanced application criteria right away. So after a lot of discussions, we decided that, okay, you can see that we actually marked all the advanced application scenarios and all the advanced, all the reporting scenarios at part 2. And we broke the feature down into 2 chunks. And we decided, okay, we are going to release part 1. It's going to help people to start working already. And then part 2 will be released as another package. So what lessons did we learn while applying Scrum on a feature like this in the application team, right? So one important thing is spike deliverables are very good starting point for complex features, because when you are going to start development and you have no idea of the existing feature and stuff like that, it's much better to start with a spike. You will come up with some estimates. You can evaluate whether your team size is correct and whether you're doing it in the right order, than just to open the designer and start coding, right? ATD is mandatory for features like this, because when we started, we didn't know how it's going to work finally. It was a legal concept we had to put in. So we said, okay, let's assume that it's going to work like this. Let's start writing the tests. And as we started writing the tests, we adjusted based on the understanding. And since everyone is writing tests at the beginning, everybody understands the feature in the same way. It's not that the developer develops something and he understands the feature in one way and the tester goes and reads the specs and then he understands the feature in a different way. And once your acceptance tests are in place and you write the code and the tests pass, then they automatically become regression tests. So they will actually prevent regression in the future. So you have acceptance tests written, they fail at the beginning, you make them pass, they become regression tests. The future deliverables that you make, they will not break the deliverables that you made upfront. Tracking progress is very important, especially if you're interested when you're going to finish, because maybe it's a legal feature, you can't just deliver a chunk. Every 2 weeks, see where you are, whether you are doing too much, whether you can cut off something, and communicate all the time, like we did every 2 weeks to our stakeholders. And control queue size, I already touched on that. If you have customer value waiting and you can ship it, please ship it. And use your continuous improvement cycle. So start, plan, execute, and then in 2 weeks meet and see what you've done wrong, what you've done right, and improve every 2 weeks. So what was the final reaction after all this? So I will again let that picture explain itself. We had a lot of happy stakeholders, and we were happy, the whole team was happy by the approach we took. So I will hand it back to Jens again for...
Yes, so how does this relate to you, and how does that relate to the next version of NAV? I think that moving forward, we do have some goals that we want to achieve. We want to cut down our release cycle to once per year. And of course, in order to do that, we need to make sure that everything works all the time. We can't spend 6 to 9 months verifying whether the next version works. It just has to work all the time. If you're going to pursue something similar yourself, which you probably will have to in a service world, because this is where it ties into services. With services, customers get to expect that you get regular updates. It doesn't help that it takes another 3 years until something new comes. So you need to create some way of always validating that what you have is working. And unfortunately, there isn't an easy answer. I think a lot of the answer is test, test, and test. Everybody writes tests. And it doesn't sound really that interesting in the beginning, but it just gives you so much freedom. You know you can change anything in the product, and you know that whether it still works. It's become such a nice thing to submit code for us for the depot. We're not worried, because most likely, if it's very wrong, it'll get caught. You'll get a red mail instead. Now, another thing that we're going to try for NAV Sicily is, and this has not been finalized yet, but at least I know in the TAP program they will get frequent drops so that you can actually get to it more frequently. And of course, we want to ship more countries simultaneously. It also means that you'll probably not hear us talking in conferences about things that we will develop 2 years from now. I think we've done that enough. More likely, what you'll hear at conferences is actually things we've already created or very close to and we're just about to ship. And the idea is we shouldn't talk about things that will happen 2 years or 3 years down the road. We'd much rather talk about the things that we know you'll get And we will be focusing on fewer things so that we can get them out. Instead of starting 14 different projects, we would rather focus on fewer parts of the product that we will then improve in each release. For our process goals, we generally want to strive that we have no known defects that we've known about for more than 2 weeks. That's the process goal. We're still not quite there, but I actually think we'll get there so that whenever a bug is reported, then we'll fix it right away. Just for your information, what happens today when you submit a hotfix request for the platform is that if it reproduces in the latest version, then the product team picks it up, fixes it, and then we backport it to the previous version. So in that respect, it becomes just another bug. And well, there we also want to release a hotfix within 2 weeks. So it also allows us to get hotfixes out pretty quickly. And we generally prioritize fixing the existing issues before we make new stuff. And probably this has meant we have done fewer new features over the last year. But we actually think it pays off to slow down in order to move faster, so that we always have a stable base. Now, the last piece, move to a Kanban model, is one of the problems we've actually seen with moving to Scrum and these 2-week cadences is that it has this inherent cadence to it, but what you couldn't see from there is that the Wednesday before the sprint review, everybody would be submitting their code. So that the first couple of days in the sprint, well, there weren't that many check-ins, and then at the end, well, now you're ready to check it in. And we actually want to smoothen that out so it's a continuous process. And we want to be even more elaborate on limiting the work in progress. So I'm just going to touch upon a slight variation of Scrum, which is quite often referred to as a Kanban model. Kanban is Japanese word for signal board. Sometimes you think, if you listen to the discussions at MDCC, you would think it's a new magic word, that if you say it 3 times, then all problems disappear. I wish it was so well, but the idea is that you want to visualize the workflow so that you actually allow yourself to use both the left-hand side and the right-hand side of the brain. I can never remember which one is logical and which one is not, but and limit the work in progress. And then suddenly, the main measure you get is the cycle time. From we started this thing, how long time did it take until it was done? And we basically mean from we start writing the first acceptance test, or we actually start grooming it, until we have the training material, the readiness material, etc. How long time does that take? And that's what we're going to measure. Now, this doesn't mean that we're doing away with all the other stuff. We're actually combining it with the 2-week cadence, except we won't have this, oh, we have a plan, and then we validate whether we met the plan, because we never did. Honestly, as you could see from Gaurav's, we are always too optimistic. Yes, we say we'll do these 3-4 deliverables, and they take longer, or we discover something. But overall, it's not that important whether you actually finish exactly what you promised. What you want to avoid is you want to avoid starting too many things in parallel and never finishing anything up. Because things just take time. You need to finish them up. You shouldn't hurry finishing something up before you move on to the next thing. You should rather do it right and then move on. But the whole idea here is to slice it thinly so we don't have these large projects. So, I'll have an example here. This is a Kanban board. This could be for when we develop the debugger. This is not exactly how we develop the debugger, but this is just to show you the principle. The idea is that you actually have a visual representation of all the states. You actually saw before some of the whiteboards. We use whiteboards a lot currently. They are very popular. The latest in technology. Post-its on whiteboards. But in this case, so this is a team that are currently developing jump and call stack and roll back and exit. And they're currently validating the show local values in the debugger and showing the call stack. And then our famous developer with the blank face and the blue hat says he's done. So this one moves over. It's now over in the done column of the development part there. So what should we do next? Well, down here, I'm not sure you can see it, but there are actually some red numbers. In this team, they've decided we don't want to have more than 2 in the grooming state, 2 in the develop state, and 2 in the validating state. The whole idea is you want to limit your queues. You want to focus on the bottlenecks. You want to limit the work in progress. So, well, there are 2 already in the develop part, so he cannot start the show records. Then the tester, wearing a green hat. You can always figure out who's the tester by just looking at the green hats. He would like to have some help because, well, the developer, he can't start on anything else. So fortunately, hopefully you get into a situation where you can do more than one thing. So now the developer will help with the tester. So next day, they're done with this. That's nice because it was very obvious you had the validate part and develop was all full, so you couldn't really put more into those states. Then the next day, well, the developer's thinking, so now I'm done with this, what now? The tester is still working on show local values. So he can't really start on anything. Should he develop something new? Should he validate? Now the PM, he says, well, he's actually also done. So he moves this one. This is now groomed. We actually know the user story well enough so that we can actually start developing it. So he can also validate the rollback. So now suddenly you can have him pick up the development task, bring that over into the validate state, and then the developer in this case could then start working on the next thing. The whole idea is you want to visualize this flow across. You have the flow vertically over, and what we're trying to optimize for is the flow through. And you swarm around the bottlenecks. Whenever there's a bottleneck, everybody tries to help out. And honestly, I didn't believe in this. This is just a fancy way of presenting lists. But it actually works, because if you look at one of these boards, it becomes so obvious. We have small tricks. We put pictures on each of these stickers, because then you know, well, Gaurav is sick, so how can his picture be on something that's sitting on our bottleneck? We better do something about it. And lots of small tricks that actually allows you to get an overview of this team. How does this work? What we're then trying to do is roll it up into, so that we actually have sort of themes, and then we can only have a number of active themes. That's what I said earlier about limiting what we actually touch in each release. The whole idea compared here to Scrum is that it becomes a continuous process where you can basically where you can prioritize all the time, and you always focus on getting things out of the way. You just want to remove all the queues. And this is an example of one of the Kanban boards we use. Of course, we're developers, so the first thing somebody does is a small tool to actually print out post-it notes, etc. But it's really low-tech. And I like the low-tech approach because it's so easy to change the process. In the retrospective, you figure out this doesn't work. Oh, then you can actually draw a new line, and then you've got a new state. Or the work in progress. Well, actually, we can manage to have 3 things going on in parallel. Then you just go over and change the number. It's very adaptive. We just change it all the time. It doesn't really change that we want to deliver everything as soon as possible. It just takes away the magic, some of the magic of the 2-week period. We still strive to break anything we do down into as small pieces as possible. Preferably, we would do it in 3 days rather than 2 weeks. So that from we start until we actually have it in the depot, everything is so fast. So, getting back to Project Dragon, was it a success or a failure? Well, I think we can still become better at it. Definitely the hardest part is rolling this up in a larger organization. It's easy. It's easy for an individual team to run Scrum. But it's hard if it's not the whole organization that accepts that you don't have exact knowledge about what you'll be doing 4 months from now. Well, actually, we didn't know that before, but we thought we did. So we planned it in detail. What would we be doing 6 months from now? And then the moment things took longer, then we would have to cut features out. And some would say, no, we should do that feature because I spent so much time writing the document for it, which is not really the best reason for doing a feature. We should always strive to optimize for what the customer has. What we can see with NAV 2013 is it's been the smoothest ride ever for releasing this product. We've almost been bored the last month. Where was all the scrambling? Where was all the long nights where we were coding all night to fix the last bugs and introduce 5 new? We didn't have any of that fun. So I actually think it works for us. Will it work for the standard NAV partner out there? Well, of course, every situation is different. There is not one right way to do this. But some of the principles, I think, really apply. Getting feedback fast, test, always have something that is ready to ship. I think those principles actually apply to most companies that make a living out of developing software, one way or the other. Now, the actual mechanics about it will change a lot. I don't expect anyone here to go out and build a large server farm and do 19,800 builds. That's probably not where you start. But it's all the principles about delivering value fast. And in some respects, you have it easier because you're most likely more connected to the customer. What we're actually trying to do in NAV Sicily is that for every theme or sort of group of user stories, as a requirement for closing it down, we need to show it to customers. So we need to find someone. We may even have to hire consultants by the hour to actually try and use it, to validate that this actually works. So it's become part of being done, is getting it into the hands of real customers. So that's where we're going. Now, has this been a success or a failure? Well, the real test is whether customers buy the product. If they do, then it was a success. If they don't, well, then it was a nice exercise for us trying to do it. But we hope that the customers will like the product and that you will. And we also hope that this could have given some inspiration, a little bit of insight into how we work at NAV. And I hope that you got a little inspiration to take back. So with this, we will match it with the questions and answers slide coming up. So if anybody has any questions, yes? So the question is, how do we get the requirements from the customers? There are several steps. First of all, there is the standard way where you go out and talk to partners, what's most needed, etc. But some of it is actually taking the user stories, the thin slice, drawing up a storyboard and actually contacting some customers. But we don't get fixed requirements. It's more of a discussion. Now, a second part that we are, of course, trying to do more of is actually measuring the product. We would like to put in measures in the product about how often has this report been run, how often are they doing this, etc., etc. So we're trying to attack that from multiple angles. But we're not trying to get all the requirements at once. Actually, one of the hardest parts is, and that's not something we can actually go and ask customers directly about, is what areas to invest in. But that has to be something, where do we think the market will go? You can definitely see we will be investing in running NAV as a service because, well, we've been talking about that at Directions and earlier, and we think that that's where Microsoft thinks that's where software in general is going. So that's more a strategic investment. But for the individual features or slices, etc., we want to go out and talk to customers. We actually have a goal that our program managers basically spend half of their time talking to customers. That's an aspiration. We're not there yet. And I have some T-shirts to hand out. Yes? Yes? So the question is, how do we actually cope with, for instance, pairing up very good programmers with very junior programmers, and how does that work? Well, I think actually the very good programmer and the junior programmer is a perfect combination, because it's the fastest way to teach a junior programmer is you actually sit next to each other. Now, we don't do pair programming all the time. That's not but we do it basically in the beginning of solving a problem, and then quite often the two programmers go to their own desk and finish up the work. But a lot of the problem solving is done in a pair. So it's a mix between pair programming and individual programming, and I think it's about everybody accepting that, yes, each individual can optimize his own time better by doing his own stuff. But as an organization, that does not lead to the most optimal, because then you create bottlenecks. The moment the good programmer is out, nobody can pick up. But if you've done pair programming, then at least the other one's got a lot better starting point. So I think it's about accepting that that initially it takes longer, but accepting the fact that what's optimal for me personally is not necessarily optimal for the organization, and then be a little pragmatic about it. It's not like we say, oh, you need to do pair programming 3 hours a day or you will be terminated. No, that's not that's not exactly the way it works. Now, it should also be mentioned, actually, that we have public code reviews. So whenever we check in code, it gets published basically to the full organization, so you can never sneak in code. So somebody else will be looking at your code regardless. So this is actually a way to get feedback on your code even earlier before sending it out to everyone. So there is some in it. Now, we're not quite where we want to be with pair programming. We're not as far because we're old-fashioned. A lot of us have been coding for many years, and old habits, well, they can be hard to cope with. But we're trying. But I think it's all accepting the fact that what's optimal for the individual schedule is not necessarily optimal for the team or for the organization as a whole. But it's a good question. And we don't have the full answer yet.
So Jens, I would like to add the CL side to this. So I also thought that how do we match an experienced and a non-experienced programmer? But I have first-hand example on this. When you are developing, let's say, an ERP functionality, one guy, let's say, who has the keyboard on, he's thinking of making it work. But there is no junior programmer as far as software practices are concerned, right? So when you are developing something, let's say a tester is sitting next to you, he said, okay, you've written this function. Don't think it's very testable. Because you are one guy is thinking about making it work, the other guy is thinking about, is it at the right place? This function calls to be in this table and not in this huge management code unit. So two people are thinking and trying to pull it in different directions, right? So it's not about, does this person know Navision? Because maybe one person who's developing knows it, but the other person knows the design principles. Does it follow the design patterns or not? And I have faced it so many times, it's just amazing. That doesn't matter how new the developer is, it always adds a lot of value. Refactor it, put it there. This function does too much, has more than one responsibility. You don't think about it when you're about to make a, let's say, a complex costing feature work, right? Does that answer your question? Well, I mean, I think there's not much room for it because of public code reviews. Because now you know that you have to send it for public review. So before you even send it, you've thought about it. If this person is complaining about it, maybe 5 other persons will also complain about it.
Plus, and also just realizing that most likely you will learn something. Usually it's not person A or person B who's right. It's usually some combination of the two. If you have the respect for each other, it actually works out pretty nicely. Question there? So the question is, have we implemented this with distributed teams? Partly, yes. For many teams have team members working in other countries. Now, if it's within the same time zone, then That's one way. We actually have what we call a Kalman box, and because we have a developer who's sitting in Hungary, and he's always online using Skype, etc. So sometimes you're in the office and you're talking about something, then you hear Kalman from the corner saying, "Oh, I know something about that," and he's actually sitting listening in, etc. And also in the daily stand-up meeting, we actually make sure we have online access. Now, for different time zones, it actually becomes harder, because there, a lot of Scrum is about this informal communication, and it doesn't happen that much at night. If you're working and everybody else is sleeping, you don't go call them and say, "Should we have a Scrum meeting?" So in that case, it's hard. But we have some of our technical writers sitting in the US, and I worked with Jill, and she's been fantastic in getting up early in the morning. She would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to talk to us and stuff, because she actually wanted to be part of it. And then I hope she'll go back to sleep again afterwards. But it takes more effort with distributed teams. But with new technology, you're much better off now than you were 5 years ago. But there is an added challenge with distributed teams, definitely. But you shouldn't give up front just because they're distributed. Yes, I get to distribute more T-shirts.
Yes.
Yes, down here. So the question is, who is responsible for the functional design?
So that's, thing is that this whole design, develop, and test idea is completely gone, right? I mean, you have a user story. And the idea is that everybody is sitting and saying, what do we need to do to enable the user story, right? So PM is coming up, let's say, with a suggestion of how to do it. But then dev and test, while writing the acceptance test, is giving input on it. So there is no one person responsible to create a functional design. The important thing is whether it works the way customer wants it to work, right? And does it deliver the value that he needs out of it?
But I would like to add that Scurav, he had this spike deliverable first, where you try to lay sort of the groundwork for, well, how do you want this to fit in with the rest of the system? And there we do design reviews with the team or with some of the architects. But that is usually on a pretty high level, so that it matches the overall architecture and the overall design. We actually leave a lot of the details for later. We don't write them down in detail because we actually allow them to change along the way. But of course, we don't want the big picture to change. So there are certain functionality that fits here, some fits there, etc. That's what we use the spike deliverables for, is sort of agreeing to the overall way we want to develop this feature. But there is not one single person who is the one solely responsible.